first creak I heard in Crowhaven House wasn't the groan of ancient timbers settling, or the sigh of wind through broken panes. It was my name, Elara. The old floorboards beneath my worn boots seemed to whisper, a soft, sibilant welcome from the deepening shadows of the entrance hall. I'd been inside less than 5 minutes. So much for a quiet writer's retreat. My name is Elara Monroe, though lately, struggling author felt more accurate. My agent had called Mr. Julian Vance's offer a godsend. 6 months, rent-free, in a historic Virginia manor, all expenses paid, in exchange for me simply living there, and perhaps finding inspiration for my next Gothic novel. The catch? Crowhaven House, nestled deep in the aptly named Widow's Hollow, had a reputation, a dark one, and a rather particular set of house rules. Mr. Vance himself, when he'd met me at the rusted wrought iron gates, was anything but dark. Early 30s, impeccably dressed, with a lawyer's precise diction and a reassuring smile that seemed just a little too practiced. He'd handed me a heavy antique key and a crisply typed sheet of paper. Just a few idiosyncrasies of the estate, Miss Monroe, he'd said, his voice smooth as polished mahogany, to ensure your stay is harmonious and, shall we say, undisturbed. Crowhaven loomed before me now, a sprawling stone edifice silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky. It was beautiful in a decaying, melancholic way, like a forgotten queen draped in ivy and sorrow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint, sweet fragrance I couldn't quite place. Jasmine, perhaps, or night-blooming phlox, strangely out of season. Reese Kendrick, the groundskeeper Mr. Vance had briefly introduced, was silently raking leaves near a gnarled oak, his back to me, a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He'd only offered a curt nod, his eyes the color of storm clouds, holding a fleeting expression that might have been pity, or perhaps a warning. I unfolded the typed sheet. 3 rules. Just 3 rules. Just 3. Do not open the attic door. It locks from the inside. If the mirrors in the house fog over inexplicably, do not wipe them. She is watching. When the floorboards creak your name, do not attempt to sleep in your designated bedroom. She's under the bed. My Aunt Bruxfall laughed. My writer's curiosity thrilled. My very human survival instinct screamed. She. The ubiquitous, unnamed she. Just a quaint local legend, Miss Monroe. Mr. Vance had said when I'd raised an eyebrow. Mr. Vance had said when I'd raised an eyebrow. A personification of the house spirit, if you will. Old houses, they have their habits. Adhere to the guidelines, and you'll find Crowhaven a most inspiring muse. His smile hadn't wavered, but his eyes, for a split second, had seemed to hold a flicker of something else. Anticipation. Or was it calculation? Now, standing in the echoing silence of the hall, the floorboards having already offered their unsettling greeting. Inspiring wasn't the word that came to mind. Malevolent felt closer to the mark. Widow's Hollow and its weeping heart, Crowhaven House, had welcomed me, and I had a chilling feeling that the welcome was far from over. The first few days at Crowhaven were a strange dance between mundane settling in and a growing, pervasive unease. I explored the cavernous rooms, each draped in dust sheets like ghostly shrouds, the air thick with the scent of aged wood, decaying paper, and that persistent, sweet floral note, now tinged with something a little sharper, a little more like. The silence was profound, broken only by the house's own groans and sighs, and the occasional distant caw of a crow from the skeletal branches of the trees surrounding the hollow. I tried to write, to conjure the Gothic atmosphere required for my languishing manuscript, but the house itself seemed to be writing its own, far more compelling story around me. The attic door, at the far end of the second-floor landing, became an obsession. It was a plain, unadorned wooden door, its paint peeling, its brass knob tarnished, nothing outwardly menacing, yet it radiated a palpable something, a coldness, a sense of ancient grief. And, as per Mr. Vance's first chilling rule, it locked from the inside. I tried the knob, gently at first, then with more force. It was solid, unyielding, pressing my ear against the wood. I could hear nothing. Or was it? Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the old house was at its most vocal, I'd creep out and listen. And then, I'd hear it. A faint, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on dry wood, or the soft, almost inaudible whisper of a pen on parchment. An unsane scribe, locked away in a room no one could enter. Reese Kendrick, the taciturn groundskeeper, appeared infrequently, tending to the overgrown gardens with a grim, methodical efficiency. He rarely spoke, but his eyes, those stormy gray pools, often followed me as I moved about the house. One afternoon, as I was struggling with a jammed window latch, he appeared at my elbow. "Some windows here. They don't want to see the outside," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. He fixed the latch with a practiced ease, same as some doors. Best left to keep their secrets. He glanced pointedly towards the attic door at the end of the hall. The Crowhavens. They had a lot of secrets, a lot of sorrows, especially Isabella, the first Mrs. Crowhaven, according to the local historical society pamphlets I'd found tucked away in the library. Died young, tragic circumstances, no details. That evening, a name popped up in my email inbox that made me sit bolt upright. Zerafina Saramoon, a folklorist, a researcher of the esoteric, whose work on liminal spaces and their spectral inhabitants I'd peripherally followed. Her email was brief, almost a little breathless. She'd heard, through academic channels, that I was residing at Crowhaven. She offered a stark, unadorned warning. Crowhaven doesn't just have a history, Miss Monroe. It has a memory, and it seeks resonance. Be careful what sorrows you share with its walls. Resonance. The word chilled me. It echoed the strange vibrations I sometimes felt from the house itself. The way my own moods seemed to dip and darken within its oppressive embrace. Later that night, I found it, tucked into the back of a drawer in the massive four-poster bed in my designated room. The room I was beginning to dread was a small, leather-bound diary. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate, feminine. The early entries were filled with the joys of a new bride, of a new home. Then, a shift. Talk of loneliness, of a child longed for, of a coldness from her husband. And then, entries about the attic. He forbids me to go up there. Says it is unsafe. But I hear her, crying. Always crying. My little one. The last few pages were violently torn out. The penmanship on the final ragged edge was barely legible. She doesn't want us near her child. She has locked herself in with her grief, locks from the inside. My blood ran cold. Isabella hadn't been the one crying. The feeling of being watched at Crowhaven became a constant, unwelcome companion. It wasn't just a prickle on the back of my neck. It was a palpable pressure, a sense of unseen eyes following my every move. I'd find objects slightly out of place. A book I hadn't touched open to a specific passage. A teacup moved from one side of the table to the other. The house was alive, and it was interacting. Rule number 2. If the mirrors in the house fog over inexplicably, do not wipe them. She is watching, made its presence known with a chilling subtlety. It wasn't just the bathroom mirror. One crisp morning, I walked into the grand, dust-sheeted dining room, and every reflective surface, the tarnished silver serving dishes on the sideboard, the glass of the china cabinet, even the dark, polished surface of the mahogany table, Was, filmed with a delicate, opaque mist. It wasn't steam. The air was cool, dry, and through that pearlescent veil, I had the distinct, horrifying impression of movement, of a tall, slender silhouette standing just beyond the edge of my vision. A woman in a long, dark dress, her head bowed as if in sorrow. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. The mist clung to the surfaces for hours, slowly receding, leaving behind no trace except a profound, bone-deep chill and the lingering, sweet, sad scent of faded jasmine. She is watching. The words were no longer an abstract rule. They were a terrifying, observable truth. Mr. Julian Vance made one of his infrequent check-in visits. He listened with polite, sympathetic interest as I, cautiously, recounted some of the house's quirks, omitting, of course, the floorboards creaking my name or the whispers from the attic. He nodded sagely. "Old houses have an atmosphere, Miss Monroe," he said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "They absorb the emotions of those who have lived and suffered within them. Crowhaven, understandably, has a more pronounced atmosphere than most." He then reiterated, with a gentle but firm emphasis, the importance of maintaining the house's delicate equilibrium by strictly adhering to the rules. "They are not arbitrary," he assured me. "They are the result of generations of understanding how best to coexist with Crowhaven's unique character." His words meant to be reassuring, only deepened my unease. It sounded less like coexisting and more like appeasement. Zara Moon via a secure video call provided more specific, if equally unsettling context. "Isabella Crowhaven," she explained, her young face serious, her eyes reflecting the glow of her own monitor, "wasn't just grieving. The local legends, the fragments I've pieced together from old parish records and whispered family histories, suggest she was shunned, accused of witchcraft perhaps, or of somehow being responsible for her child's death. The attic was her prison, then her tomb. The mirrors, they say spirits, especially those trapped by unresolved grief, often manifest in reflective surfaces, seeking to see themselves, or to see those they've lost. Wiping the mist, acknowledging her directly, might be seen as an invitation, or a confrontation. An invitation. The word hung in the air long after the call ended. That night, as I lay rigidly on the lumpy sofa in the drawing room, I'd long since abandoned the master bedroom and its whispering floorboards. I stared at my laptop screen. I had managed to find a digitized newspaper archive from the local historical society. An article from 1888 detailing the tragedy at Crowhaven Manor. Mr. Nathaniel Crowhaven, the original owner, his young wife Isabella, and their infant daughter, Lillian. Lillian had died of a sudden fever. Isabella, inconsolable, had locked herself in the attic nursery and refused to emerge. Days later, she was found. The article became vague, citing a decline brought on by extreme grief. No mention of suicide. No mention of locks from the inside. But then, a small, almost overlooked detail at the end of the article. A brief mention of the unusual fog that had plagued Widow's Hollow that particular autumn. A chilling, persistent mist, the reporter had written, that seemed to cling to the windows of Crowhaven, obscuring all within, as if the house itself sought to draw a veil over its sorrows. A veil like the mist on the mirrors. As I read those words, every mirror in the drawing room, the ornate gilt mirror above the fireplace, the glass in the grandfather clock, even the dark screen of my unlit television, simultaneously fogged over, a milky white film instantly obscuring their surfaces. And from behind me, a soft, almost inaudible sigh, and the faintest whisper of my name, Elara. This time, it wasn't the floorboards. It was closer, much closer. The uncanny rhythm of Crowhaven House began to seep into my bones, into my writing, into my very sanity. The creative block that had plagued me for months was gone, replaced by a feverish, almost manic productivity. I wrote for hours, day and night, the words pouring out of me, dark, gothic, filled with themes of loss, betrayal, and trapped spirits. But sometimes, rereading what I'd written, I barely recognized the prose. It was more ornate, more melancholic, more Isabella than Elara. It felt as if she wasn't just under the bed or watching from the mirrors, but was now also guiding my hand, whispering her own tragic story through mine. Rule number 3. When the floorboards creak your name, do not sleep. She is under the bed became a nightly torment. It started as subtle creaks, indistinct whispers. Elara. Sometimes it sounded like a plea, sometimes a gentle summons, sometimes a low, sibilant threat. The antique floorboards in the master bedroom seemed to possess a malevolent sentience, their groans and sighs forming my name with chilling precision. I dragged the mattress into the drawing room, then eventually just slept fitfully on the sofa, a baseball bat borrowed from Reese Kendrick's shed propped beside me, the lights always blazing. The jasmine lilac scent intensified, often accompanied by a profound, inexplicable sadness that would wash over me, leaving me weepy and disoriented. My fear, once a manageable undercurrent, was now a constant companion, gnawing at my resolve. Was I losing my mind? Was this the inspiration Mr. Vance had so glibly promised Reese Kendrick on one of his increasingly frequent groundskeeping visits, though he seemed to spend more time watching the house and me than tending the wilting roses, found me one morning, hollow-eyed and trembling after a particularly bad night of floorboard confessions. He didn't comment on my disheveled state, just silently handed me a thermos of strong black coffee and a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its paint faded. My grandmother whittled these, he said, his voice a low rumble. Said they were spirit catchers, to keep the bad dreams from nesting. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the brooding facade of Crowhaven. This house, it don't like to be empty, but it likes its company, in particular. Last fella Vance's put in here, a painter, they carried him out in a straitjacket, screaming about a woman in the walls who stole his colors. He looked directly at me. The rules ain't suggestions, Miss Monroe. They're anchors. You let go. This place will drag you down with it. He then gave me the bundle of dried sage, his only advice being to burn it when the air gets too heavy with her perfume. My suspicions about Julian Vance solidified. This wasn't a benevolent offer of a writer's retreat. This was something else. I re-examined the contract had me sign. Buried in the boilerplate, I found it. A clause, subtly worded, about the occupant agreeing to be a passive conduit for the estate's ambient historical resonances. And another, even more disturbing, granting the Crowhaven Heritage Trust, Vance was the sole trustee, rights to any creatively inspired works produced during residency, particularly those reflecting the unique atmospheric qualities of the property. He wasn't just offering me a house, he was offering me to the house, or to her. Sierra Moon, during another hushed video call, confirmed my growing dread. Vance isn't just a lawyer, Ellie. He's a collector, not of antiques, but of... He believes certain locations, certain spirits, can infuse chosen individuals with creative genius. But there's always a price. The weeping widow of Crowhaven. She doesn't just inspire Ellie, she consumes. She seeks to merge, to relive her sorrow, her rage, through a new vessel. And you, a writer specializing in the very darkness she embodies. You're a perfect match. That night, the floorboards didn't just creak my name, they sang it. A mournful, multi-layered dirge that seemed to rise from the very foundations of Crowhaven. And beneath the song, another sound, the distinct, rhythmic creak, creak, creak of a rocking chair. From the attic whose door locked from the inside. I was no longer just a writer seeking inspiration. I was bait, and the trap, I realized with dawning horror, had been set long before I ever signed Mr. Vance's damning contract. My descent into Crowhaven's weeping heart was well underway. The storm that had been brewing over Widow's Hollow for days finally broke with the savage fury of a cornered beast, timed with chilling prescience to the anniversary of Lillian Crowhaven's death. A detail Ellie had unearthed from a crumbling parish register Sarah Moon had guided her to. Rain lashed against Crowhaven House in solid sheets. Wind howled through the eaves like 1,000 grieving souls, and the ancient timbers of the manor groaned as if in sympathetic agony. The power, predictably, died within minutes, plunging the house into a suffocating, primal darkness, broken only by the erratic, blue-white flashes of lightning. It was in this maelstrom that Crowhaven truly came alive, or rather, that she, Isabella, fully awoke. The attic door, the one that locked from the inside, didn't just creak open. It slammed against the hallway wall with a sound like a cannon shot. A gust of icy jasmine and decay-scented air rushing down the staircase. Simultaneously, every mirror in the house fogged over instantly, not with a gentle mist, but with a thick, opaque rime, like a frozen crypt. And through that rime, a symphony of distorted reflections writhed, not of the rooms they occupied, but of a shadowy, cavernous space, a nursery filled with antique toys draped in cobwebs, and in the center, a small, empty cradle rocking violently on its own. The floorboards no longer whispered Ellie's name. They screamed it, a chorus of splintering wood and trapped despair. Elara, Elara, join us, feel our sorrow. The sound was everywhere, under her feet, in the walls, in her very bones. The feeling of Isabella being under the bed was no longer a creeping dread. It was a suffocating certainty, as if cold, spectral hands were reaching up from the abyss beneath the floor. Ellie, huddled by the dying embers of the drawing-room fireplace, clutching Reese Kendrick's carved spirit-catcher bird and the bundle of sage, knew this was it. The house and Isabella were demanding their due. She had to face it. She had to go to the attic. As she stumbled up the grand staircase, each step a battle against the shrieking wind and the house's own malevolent will, a figure emerged from the shadows of the landing. Julian Vance. His usually impeccable suit was disheveled, his hair plastered to his forehead by a sheen of sweat or rain, his eyes burning with a feverish, almost ecstatic light. He carried a single flickering candelabra. "Magnificent, isn't she, Miss Monroe?" he said, his voice a low, rapturous hum above the storm's roar. The raw, unadulterated grief, the sublime creative energy. Tonight is the night of perfect resonance. Vance, you knew this would happen. Ellie accused, shrinking back. Shrinking back. You set me up. He laughed, a chilling, mirthless sound. Set you up? My dear Elara, I selected you. Crowhaven chooses its vessels carefully. It tasted your latent sorrows, your writer's empathy, your quiet desperation, Isabella. She's been so lonely, so uninspired. He gestured towards the open attic door. She needs a new voice, a new heart to contain her endless requiem. And you, with your gift for weaving tales of darkness and loss, you will be her masterpiece. The twist was sickeningly clear. Vance wasn't a mere lawyer. He was a connoisseur of suffering, a orchestrator of spectral symbiosis. He wasn't a descendant of the Crowhavens, but a member of a clandestine society. The Morning Quill, he called it, that believed true artistic genius, true immortality, could only be achieved by merging with a potent, tormented spirit. Crowhaven was their high temple, Isabella, their tragic muse, and Ellie, their latest, most promising offering. The previous tenants, the painter who went mad, the poet who vanished, they were all failed experiments. "You're insane," Ellie cried. "Perhaps." Vance conceded with a predatory smile. "But imagine the stories you will write, Elara. Stories that will echo through eternity, infused with the sorrow of ages. You will become Isabella, and Isabella will live again through you." From the attic, a low, keening wail began, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish that householed through Ellie's very soul. It was Isabella's voice, but also, disturbingly, her own. The house shook. Just as Vance took a step towards her, a heavy thud came from the main door downstairs, followed by Reese Kendrick's gruff voice shouting her name. Zara Moon was with him, her face pale but determined, clutching an old, leather-bound book filled with esoteric symbols. They had braved the storm, sensing the culmination. "Vance, leave her be," Reese bellowed, appearing at the foot of the stairs, a heavy woodsman's axe in his hand. Sierra was beside him, already chanting in a low, rhythmic language. The battle was joined. While Reese physically confronted Vance, a desperate, brutal struggle in the storm-lashed hallway. Sierra guided Ellie towards the attic. "You have to face her, Ellie. But not as a victim, as an equal. She's trapped by her sorrow, by this house, by him." Sarah pressed a small, cold iron charm into Ellie's hand. This belonged to a child Isabella loved before Lillian, a warding charm. It might disrupt her focus. The attic was a maelstrom of frigid air, swirling dust, and overwhelming grief. In the center stood a rocking chair, creaking rhythmically on its own, and seated in it, or perhaps composed of the shadows and the sorrow itself, was the figure of a woman in a tattered Victorian morning gown, her face obscured by a fall of dark hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The scent of jasmine and decay was overpowering. "Isabella," Ellie whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, the iron charm cold in her palm. The figure looked up, and it was, for a horrifying instant, Ellie's own face, contorted in an agony beyond words. Then it shifted, becoming the gaunt, tragic face of a woman from a bygone era. "My child. They took my child." The entity wailed, its voice a chorus of wind and weeping. But then, from behind her, a new, weaker voice, the voice of a young girl. "Mama, I'm still here. I'm just lost in the dark walls, Lillian. Not dead, but somehow absorbed by the house, by Isabella's overwhelming grief, her spirit trapped within the very fabric of Crowhaven." Vance, having temporarily bested Reese, appeared at the attic door, his face a mask of triumph. "Yes, listen to her, feel her, become her vessel, Elara, the ultimate inspiration." Ellie knew what she had to do. This wasn't about fighting Isabella. It was about freeing her, freeing them both. "Isabella," Ellie said, her voice clear and strong, projecting over Vance's rants. "Your daughter Lillian, she's not gone. She's here, trapped by your sorrow, trapped by this house. You have to let her go. You have to let yourself go." She held out the iron charm. "This isn't about inspiration, Vance. It's about healing." The figure of Isabella recoiled as if struck. The weeping intensified, but now there was a new note in it, confusion, a dawning awareness. The image of Lillian, a small, frightened girl, flickered at the edges of Isabella's shadowy form. Sarah, at the doorway, began a new chant, a song of gentle release, of guiding lost souls, Reese, bruised but resolute, stood guard. This was Ellie's story to write, not with ink and paper, but with empathy and courage. She stepped forward, towards the grieving specter, the iron charm held out like a beacon. Her heart filled not with fear, but with a profound, aching compassion. The final chapter of Crowhaven's sorrow was about to be written. The confrontation in the attic reached an unspanned, ethereal climax. As Ellie spoke, her voice resonating with a genuine empathy that cut through the centuries of Isabella's sorrow, the shadowy form of the weeping widow began to waver. The image of the child, Lillian, within her spectral outline grew clearer, her small, translucent hand reaching out. "Mama?" Lillian's faint, childlike whisper echoed through the attic, a sound so filled with longing it was heartbreaking. Isabella's form convulsed. The anguished wail softened, replaced by a choked sob, a sound of dawning recognition. "Lillian, my Lillian." Julian Vance, witnessing his grand design unraveling, his perfect vessel offering compassion instead of surrendering to despair, let out a howl of incoherent rage. "No, this is not the litany. This is not the inspiration I was promised. You were meant to become her sorrow, not dispel it." He lunged towards Ellie, his face a mask of fury. Reese Kendrick anticipated his move, intercepted him with a shoulder tackle that sent Vance sprawling amongst the dusty, forgotten relics of the attic. The candelabra flew from Vance's hand, extinguishing, plunging them into near darkness, save for the erratic flashes of lightning from the storm outside. Syrah's chant grew stronger, a soothing, melodic counterpoint to the receding storm. She directed her voice not at Isabella, but at Lillian. "You are free, little one. The walls can no longer hold you. Go to the light. Your mother will follow." Isabella's shadowy form turned towards the faint, flickering image of her daughter. A profound, almost unbearable wave of love and regret washed through the attic, so potent it brought tears to Ellie's eyes. The scent of jasmine and decay began to dissipate, replaced by the clean, fresh smell of rain and damp earth. "My child," Isabella whispered, her form becoming more translucent, less defined by sorrow, more by a fragile, emerging peace. She reached out a shadowy hand towards Lillian. As their spectral fingers touched, a soft, golden light enveloped them both. For a moment, they were just a mother and child, reunited. Then, with a final sighing exhalation that seemed to carry all the pent-up grief of centuries, they faded, not into darkness, but into the light, leaving behind only the scent of rain-washed air and a profound, almost sacred silence. The attic was still. The oppressive atmosphere that had choked Crowhaven for generations was gone. The house itself seemed to exhale, the creaks and groans no longer malevolent, but simply the sounds of an old structure settling. Vance lay whimpering on the floor, his grand ambitions reduced to dust. The mourning quill would find no immortal inspiration here tonight. Reese hauled him roughly to his feet. Syrah, her chant finished, looked pale but serene. Ellie stood in the center of the attic, the iron charm still warm in her hand, tears streaming down her face. Tears not of fear, but of a profound, bittersweet release. She had come to Crowhaven seeking a story, and she had found one, but it was not the one she, or Julian Vance, had expected. She had not become a vessel for sorrow, but a conduit for healing. As the first rays of dawn broke through the storm clouds, painting the hollow in hues of gray and tentative gold, Crowhaven House stood silent. The rules, Ellie realized, were no longer needed. The attic door remained open, revealing an empty, dust-filled space. A room no longer locked from the inside by grief, but by a memory finally at peace. The mirrors reflected only what was there, and the floorboards were finally, blessedly, silent. The weeks that followed the storm and the spectral departure from Crowhaven's attic were a blur of official reports, bewildered local authorities, and the quiet, painstaking process of piecing together the fractured sanity of Widow's Hollow. Julian Vance, stripped of his manipulative charm, was a broken man, his ramblings about symbiotic creative energies and the sublime sorrow of eternal muses earning him a one-way ticket to a secure psychiatric facility. The Morning Quill, if it ever truly existed beyond Vance's deranged fantasies, remained an elusive, unsubstantiated whisper. Reese Kendrick, his stoicism softened by a shared, unbelievable experience, became a quiet, steady presence. He helped Ellie sort through the practicalities, his gruffness a comforting anchor in the unsettling calm that had descended upon Crowhaven. Zara Moon, her task seemingly complete, departed as quietly as she had arrived, leaving Ellie with a small, hand-bound book of folk remedies for spiritual imbalances and a cryptic smile. Ellie found she couldn't leave Crowhaven immediately. The house, no longer a source of terror, now felt empty, but also strangely peaceful, like a patient recovering from a long, debilitating fever. She spent her days wandering its rooms, the silence no longer oppressive, but contemplative. The scent of jasmine was gone, replaced by the simple, honest smell of old wood and clean air. She began to write again, but her story was different. It wasn't the gothic horror she had planned, nor was it the sorrow-drenched saga Vance had envisioned. It was a quieter tale, a story about grief, memory, and the difficult, often painful path to healing. It was about Isabella and Lillian, yes, but it was also about herself, about the shadows she had carried into Crowhaven, and the fragile light she was beginning to find. The town of Widow's Hollow, too, seemed to breathe a little easier. The pervasive gloom that had clung to it for generations began to lift, ever so slightly. The locals, though still wary of Crowhaven, no longer spoke of it in hushed, fearful tones, but with a kind of distant, melancholic respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ellie was packing her few belongings, preparing to finally leave, Reese found her in the attic. It was just a dusty, empty room now, sunlight streaming through the newly cleaned window. "Think she is really gone?" he asked, his voice unusually hesitant. Ellie looked around the quiet space. "I think Isabella found her peace, Reese. And Lillian, too." She paused. "But places like this, they remember. The echoes might fade, but they never truly disappear." She never published the book she wrote at Crowhaven. It felt too personal, too raw. Instead, she started a new manuscript, a story not about a haunted house, but about the hauntings within the human heart, about the courage it takes to face one's own attics, to wipe one's own fogged mirrors, to silence the floorboards that creak out old griefs. Years later, a renowned author living far from the mists of Widow's Hollow, Elara Monroe would sometimes, in the dead of night, awake to a faint, familiar creak from the floorboards of her modern, unhaunted apartment. "Elara," it would seem to whisper, as she would smile, a sad, knowing smile, for she understood that some stories, once lived, become a part of you, an unwritten chapter that continues to resonate, a reminder that even in the deepest hollows of sorrow, there can eventually be a hush, a quiet, and the hope of a new dawn. And very occasionally, when the air was just right, she thought she could still catch the faintest, sweetest scent of jasmine, a gentle sigh from a past finally laid to rest.